It begins in the most unexpected places. In karaoke bars where strangers sing together without hesitation, in classrooms where laughter softens the sound of grammar drills, and in the voices of children who speak English with a cadence that feels both foreign and familiar. Across the islands of the Philippines, something remarkable has unfolded over generations, a quiet cultural symphony that turned language learning into an art form of connection, not competition. English isn't just studied here, it's lived, sung, and shared. And the result? A nation where language became not just a tool, but a bridge, linking East and West, past and future, heart and mind. But how did a country thousands of miles from London or New York end up teaching English so naturally that even native speakers are taking notes? What cultural magic allows Filipinos to blend warmth, rhythm, and global fluency so effortlessly? This is not just a story about language. It's about identity, resilience, and joy. The story of how a people turn learning into living. If stories like this fascinate you, make sure to subscribe and join us as we uncover more of the world's hidden connections. And tell us, where you're watching from. Could your culture hold its own secret to effortless learning too? Long before the world began to call the Philippines one of the best English-speaking nations in Asia, the islands already had a deep relationship with language itself. Before colonial times, Filipinos spoke in melodies, regional tongues that carried the sound of rivers and rain, where meaning lived in tone and rhythm as much as in words. Then history swept in. For more than 3 centuries, Spanish ruled the air. Streets echoed with prayers and poetry in borrowed syllables. Later, when the Americans arrived at the turn of the 20th century, English became the new script of power and progress. But what happened next was different. Instead of resisting it, the Filipino spirit, famously adaptive and open-hearted, took this language and made it its own. English was not imposed in the same way it was adopted elsewhere. It was infused through classroom chalk and Sunday radio dramas, through pop songs, comics, and laughter. The people didn't just memorize rules. They played with sound, molded it with their natural warmth, and made it fit their emotional landscape. And so, a strange harmony was born. An archipelago of over 180 dialects found a shared rhythm through English. It wasn't colonization anymore. It was collaboration, a cultural remix that turned imitation into creation. By the mid-20th century, English had become more than a subject in school. It was a language of opportunity, of dreams whispered in classrooms with broken fans and chalk-stained walls. But underneath that practicality lay something deeper. Filipinos didn't just learn English to survive globalization. They learned to connect. Inside small-town schools, teachers used humor and songs to teach verbs and vowels. Children mimicked Hollywood accents one day, then turned them into jokes the next, not out of mockery, but out of mastery. The culture itself became a classroom without walls, where curiosity thrived naturally. Hospital workers, call center agents, flight attendants, they would later carry this fluency across oceans. But what set them apart wasn't just pronunciation or grammar. It was empathy. English, in the Filipino context, became emotional currency, a way to make others feel seen and heard. It's why even today, when a Filipino speaks English, there's often something disarming about it. The tone feels softer, the cadence musical, as though the words are less about correctness and more about connection. It's English spoken to the heart, and perhaps that's what made it unforgettable. But how did this cultural fluency transform into global expertise? So powerful that Filipinos began teaching the very language they once inherited. It started quietly, in online classrooms, across time zones, and through glowing laptop screens. Somewhere in Manila, Cebu, or Davao, a Filipino teacher would log on at midnight to greet a student from Japan, Korea, or Brazil. "Good evening," they'd say with a smile that somehow made the digital distance disappear. At first, few noticed what was happening. The Philippines had become one of the world's largest exporters of English teachers, not by policy, but by presence. The warmth of Filipino teaching began to ripple through the global education market. Students didn't just stay for cheaper lessons. They stayed for the feeling of being understood. Unlike traditional classrooms where mistakes were corrected with red ink, Filipino teachers approached language like a dance, fluid, forgiving, joyful. They didn't just teach grammar. They nurtured confidence. They brought an empathy shaped by generations of collective struggle and hospitality, that instinct to make others feel at home, even online. Soon, foreign learners began saying something surprising. Filipino teachers make English feel easy. And it wasn't just flattery. Studies began to show higher retention rates, faster learning curves, and better conversational comfort among those taught by Filipino instructors. A global paradox had emerged. The colonized had become the educators, redefining what it means to teach English in a post-colonial world. By the 2010s, this quiet revolution had grown into a full-scale phenomenon. The Philippines was now the world hub for online English education, a digital archipelago connecting millions of learners to voices that carry both clarity and kindness. From Tokyo's skyscrapers to Sao Paulo's suburbs, English lessons now began with a familiar greeting. Hello, I'm your teacher from the Philippines. But this was more than a business trend. It was cultural redemption. The same language once used to dominate had been transformed into an instrument of empowerment. Filipino educators weren't just sharing knowledge. They were reclaiming narrative. Their students often described the lessons as different, not mechanical, not intimidating. A Korean student once said, "When I speak with my Filipino teacher, I forget I'm learning." That is the essence of the Filipino way, to turn tension into trust, to teach through warmth rather than authority. Behind this lies a powerful truth. Filipinos have always communicated beyond words. Hospitality, humor, and humility are built into the nation's DNA. When these values meet the structure of English, something beautiful happens. Language becomes human again. But as the world continues to globalize and automation begins to teach languages faster than humans ever could, one question remains. What makes the Filipino approach irreplaceable? In an age where artificial intelligence can translate any word in a heartbeat, the Filipino approach to language reminds us of something profoundly human. That learning is not just about mastery, but meaning. It's not simply about how quickly we can speak, but how deeply we can connect. Filipinos unknowingly embody one of the rarest educational philosophies. That emotion accelerates understanding. They teach English not as a subject, but as an experience, wrapped in laughter, music, and empathy. Their classrooms, whether physical or virtual, are built on relationship, not rigidity. Perhaps that's why global learners feel so at ease. Because for the Filipino, teaching isn't performance, it's participation. Every lesson becomes a conversation between equals. Every correction, a gesture of care. In this atmosphere, students stop fearing mistakes. They start finding their voice. And in doing so, they discover that language, any language, is not just a tool to communicate, but a way to feel alive in someone else's world. Maybe that's the real secret. Not the grammar, not the accent, not even the fluency. It's the feeling. The invisible warmth that threads through every sentence, turning a foreign language into a familiar song. When a Filipino teaches English, they're not transferring information. They're extending humanity. The pauses, the smiles, the gentle encouragement, all remind us that learning isn't meant to be a burden, but a bridge. In every "you can do it" lies centuries of resilience, compassion, and joy, the kind that once kept communities alive through storms, colonization, and change. This is why, even in a world powered by algorithms, the Filipino way stands apart. It doesn't just make English sound better, it makes it feel better. Because when people feel safe to make mistakes, they learn faster. And when learning is shared with empathy, it becomes more than education. It becomes connection. In the end, perhaps the Filipino story isn't just about mastering English. It's about mastering the art of understanding and reminding the world that the most universal language will always be kindness. In the end, stories like this remind us that the world's borders may divide us, but its voices still find harmony in one another. The Filipino story isn't only about English. It's about what happens when a culture turns learning into love and communication into connection. Because somewhere in every lesson, every song, and every shared smile, we are reminded that language is more than what we say. It's who we become when we truly listen.